At dawn, they hung her by her ankles, bare feet streaked with blood, swinging like butchered meat left to bleed out. A wooden sign dangled beneath her, scrawled in red paint, "Thief!" Crooked letters, slapped sideways by the wind every few seconds, as if even the breeze couldn't bear the sight. Her name was Rhea, though no one spoke it anymore, not aloud. She hadn't taken bread or cloth or gold. She had gathered herbs, wild, tangled things pulled from creek beds and hillsides, roots for breath, petals for healing. She'd left a bundle wrapped in twine on the preacher's doorstep when his wife fell ill. Unasked for, unpaid, but its scent gave her away. They came for her the next day, said the plants were poison, said she had cursed the preacher's wife, said her kind of knowledge was dangerous, said she was lucky not to be burned alive. So there she was now, strung up outside the saloon, wrists tied tight behind her back, chin sagging toward the ground, dark hair dragging through dust and dried blood. Few people met her gaze. Some drunks jeered. A small child tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked why the lady was upside down. The mother replied, "Because she broke the law." But in Hollow Creek, the law changed with the wind. It was hard when people were watching. It vanished when no one cared. Sheriff Dodd hadn't said a word, just nodded when the blacksmith pulled the rope taut. A few feet away, tied to the hitching post, stood the marshal's prized palomino, a tall, gold-colored beauty called Sable. Muscular, proud, alert. They'd tried to lead him away once the punishment started. But the horse refused. Not for sweet feed. Not for the lash. Not even when the marshal hissed curses and yanked the reins. Sable wouldn't move. He stayed rooted, ears pinned back, his eyes fixed on Rhea's battered frame. "Beast's gone mad," someone muttered. But by mid-morning, after the jeering stopped and the dust settled, only one being still faced her, the horse. No rescue came, no words of forgiveness, just a silence too heavy to ignore. Rhea, semi-conscious, blinked through the blood dripping into her eyes. She saw hooves. She heard steady breath. And under the pain and rope burns, something strange stirred inside her. Not hope, exactly, but the faintest start of something that didn't belong to the town. A tension in the air. A standoff not hers to begin, but maybe, just maybe, hers to survive. By the time the sun reached its peak, one side of her face had swollen and her lips had split from the heat. No one dared bring her water. She was already a ghost, already judged, already erased. But Sable hadn't budged. The horse stood his ground, tail flicking only when flies got too bold. Marshal Glay, red-faced and fuming, tried again. First threats, then salt rubbed into the horse's nose. "Move, you bastard!" he shouted, slapping the reins hard. Sable flinched, but then he dug his hooves deeper into the dry ground, his black eyes still locked on Rhea. "Which put a spell on him," the marshal muttered. "Beast's got her rot now." That's when people started watching, not the girl, but the horse. For the first time, they noticed how he stood. Not like a prisoner, but like a sentinel. Not as if he was stuck there, but as if he belonged there, guarding something older than their rules. They whispered. He didn't even act like this at the fair. Wouldn't let the preacher near either. By dusk, even the bartender's wife stepped outside. She didn't untie Rhea. She didn't say a word. She just dabbed gently at the blood on Rhea's neck with a rag, hands trembling like she was trying to scrub a sin from her own skin. "She helped my boy once," she murmured to the air, when he couldn't stop coughing. Then she walked away. No one stopped her. When the lamps flickered on and the night crept in, the wind shifted, sharper now, as if it remembered something. Rhea drifted in and out of fever. Around her, voices rose and fell like wind through a graveyard. But beside her, always the rhythm of breath, the smell of horsehide and straw and dust, more familiar than anything else now. She dreamed of a woman's voice, singing in a language she once knew but couldn't name anymore. A song that repeated a name, Rhea, Rhea, Rhea. Sometime past midnight, a child crept forward and left a crust of bread near her, then bolted back into the shadows before anyone could see. The rope groaned. Her ribs ached. But somewhere, quiet and deep, Something had cracked in Hollow Creek. And it wasn't Rhea. When morning light crept across the town, Sable was still there. Same spot. Same unblinking eyes locked on the woman hanging upside down. Her body swaying like ragged cloth in the wind. But something had changed. His posture now seemed louder, like it was asking a question the town didn't know how to answer. Marshall Glay hadn't slept. He spent the night pacing the boardwalk, muttering to himself about curses, women, and cursed animals. Hang a witch, the devil sends a horse, he grumbled, his boots slamming heavier each time he passed. But he didn't touch Rhea again. Didn't give the order for another lashing. Maybe it was because the stares weren't just aimed at her anymore. They had turned on him too. Even the blacksmith who'd tied the knot looked away when their eyes met. She still breathing? Someone asked outside the general store. Is she even still human? Someone else whispered. But it was Saul Briggs who finally broke the silence. Saul, who hadn't spoken in 3 years. Not since the railroad took his only boy. Shuffled out of the crowd with a dented tin can full of water. No hat, no fuss, just quiet intent. He walked straight to Rhea, dipped the edge of his sleeve in the water, and pressed the damp cloth gently to her lips. She moved, barely, but it was enough for Saul to give a single nod, like he'd just agreed to something no one else had the words for. They hanged my boy for less, he murmured, and then said nothing more. The town didn't rise up. No one charged into the sheriff's office or cried for justice. But they didn't stop Saul either, or the young girl who came at midday and draped a shawl over the fence post near Rhea, or the schoolteacher who muttered, "She's been up long enough," but kept her voice low, like even saying it was dangerous. And through it all, the horse remained. When Glay finally raised his arms in frustration, it wasn't aimed at Rhea. It was directed at the beast. "Fine," he shouted. "Let him rot there with her." But that evening, just before the sun dipped below the ridge, the preacher's wife, pale, once bedridden, the very woman Rhea had been accused of cursing, walked slowly down Main Street, upright, not coughing. She stopped in front of Rhea, looked up at her, then turned her gaze to the horse. Her lips barely moved, but she whispered, "I was wrong." No one else heard, only Sable. But when she turned to leave, the horse pawed the dirt once. A single thud, like thunder in a dry canyon. Rhea, still hanging by her ankles, felt the vibration before she heard it. Her eyes opened, clear, alive, fierce. Someone gasped. The sound carried strangely far, past the store, along the saloon's porch, even to the schoolhouse steps. An old gambler dropped his cards mid-game. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just locked her eyes on the horse, like she was trying to remember who she was. "She'll pass out again," the sheriff mumbled, but his words were brittle. Something had shifted. Not just tension, expectation. Then, of all people, Jory Bell stepped forward. 17. Skinny. Sunburnt. Laughed at by most folks. Too kind to be considered a man by the town's standards. His father used to beat the softness out of him with a belt, calling him useless as a book with no words. But now Jory walked out of the barbershop with scissors still in hand and a look like he'd just walked through fire. He didn't ask, didn't wait. He walked up to the fence post behind Rhea, reached up and in one clean motion, cut through the knot. She dropped hard, her body hitting the dirt like soaked grain. She didn't scream, just gasped, rolled onto her side, holding her ribs with one arm still bound. Jory dropped to his knees, pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, and started cutting the ties from her wrists. "This ain't right," he said. Not to her, not to the crowd, but to the ground beneath them. The silence that followed was complete. Sable stepped back, hooves stamping once more. Rhea coughed, winced, and slowly pushed herself up on her elbows, bloodied but upright. When Jory offered his hand to help her rise, she slapped it away, not from anger, but pride. She knelt, unsteady, then found her way to her feet on her own. "I'm not broken," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Then she turned to face them all, the townspeople frozen in place, unsure what to feel. Some lowered their eyes. Others just stared. But no one moved to stop her as she crawled toward the trough, dipped her hands into the cool water, and washed the blood from her face. Behind her, Sable stood, waiting, silent, unmoving. Rhea didn't cry. She didn't thank them. She didn't plead. She stood in the dust, her back bowed like something storm-battered but not broken, and looked straight at the people who had tried to erase her. They had stripped her of nearly everything, her name, her pride, even the air from her lungs, but her will was intact. Barefoot and raw, with her spine curving like a willow along the river's edge, Rhea held her gaze steady. Water trickled down her chin as she drank, but it wasn't a surrender. It was a statement. She dipped her hands into the trough, scooping the murky liquid as if it were something sacred. Not because she was desperate, but because she refused to bow. She drank slowly, deliberately, and the town stood still, watching. Sable, her horse, stood close by. He wasn't tied. He wasn't commanded. He just stayed. The preacher was the first to look away. He muttered something low, something about demons maybe, and shuffled back inside his church. One by one, the others followed, some with guilt in their steps, some with fear in their eyes. No one dared speak. Even Marshal Glay, who stood rigid with his fists clenched and his mouth set tight, couldn't make himself go near her. They all understood. There was no taking back what they'd done. No cleansing it. Rhea didn't leave. Not right away. She moved slowly toward the saloon's porch, each step careful, her breath steady. She passed the sign nailed to the post that still branded her a thief. Without flinching, she reached for the coil of rope that had been used to bind her wrists. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight. Then, without a word, she draped it across the porch rail. Not as a return, as a curse. Something they would have to carry now. Jory stood nearby, uncertain. When he finally found the courage to speak, he whispered, "What will you do now?" She didn't look at him, didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned toward the hills behind the town, where the sky opened wide and the path broke into the unknown. "I'll go back," she said, "to where I was before they forgot me, before I forgot myself." That night, Rhea didn't sleep in a house or under a roof. She lay curled by the fence post where they'd left her hanging, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to mark that place with her breath, still alive. A stranger had left her a shawl. She wrapped herself in it, one hand resting on Sable's warm flank, the other tucked against the bruises at her side. She dreamed of rhythms, drums from long ago, of hands weaving herbs into braids, of a time when pain had names and women spoke them aloud so wounds wouldn't rot in silence. When the sun rose, the trough was dry. The shawl was gone. So was Rhea. Only Sable remained, unmoving, ears turned east. Not waiting for anyone, just watching. Rhea walked through the dust and weeds until her feet cracked open, but she didn't look back. Behind her, the town dissolved like a ghost too tired to haunt. With every step, she peeled off the weight that had been forced on her. A guilt she never owned, a silence that had grown like fungus in her chest. She didn't stop until she reached a slender creek. It was the kind only those born nearby would know to follow, the kind that ran gentle if the season had been kind. Nestled among cottonwoods and sage, she saw it. A circle of stones nearly lost to moss, the bones of a long-dead fire still black at its heart. Her mother had brought her here once, before the renaming, before the illness, before the quiet took over. Rhea knelt, brushed the earth aside with her fingers. Beneath the dust, she found it. The turtle her mother had carved into stone. Her name had come from that story, the one where the turtle holds the world on her back and never lets the tears be seen. She touched the carving gently. "I remember," she whispered. Then she lit a fire, not to warm herself, but to honor memory. She gathered leaves, herbs, and wild onions. She didn't cook. Not yet. She sorted, sifted, tested the roots with her fingertips. As she named them aloud, the words felt foreign and familiar all at once. Tanika, Ketu, V. They wobbled on her tongue, but they were hers. They were the beginning of something, a language returning to itself. That night, Sable found her again. At first, she didn't hear him. only felt the shift in the ground behind her, the subtle weight of something familiar, the deep exhale of knowing. He had followed her every step, hoof by hoof, brushing off every attempt to rein him back. Rhea didn't speak. She just turned to look at him, then back to the fire and gave a single nod. "You can stay." He lowered his head to rest beside her shoulder, answering without words. And in that place, where her name held no meaning, where no one had bound her hands or cursed her presence, she finally lay down beneath stars that passed no judgment. Stars that asked only who still knew how to listen to the land. The townspeople believed she had vanished into the wilderness, swallowed up by brush and night like women cast out were meant to disappear, like a mistake the world pretends it never made. But Sable's absence made forgetting her impossible. He wasn't just any horse. He had been the marshal's pride, the town's glory, more symbol than beast. Now he was gone. Not stolen, not taken, but walked away on his own, ignoring commands, turning away from grain and stable. For 7 days, Rhea wasn't seen. Then someone noticed the sage, bundles tied carefully in a pattern along a quiet trail near the southern ridge, the kind only women who remembered the old signs would know. Someone else saw faint scorched circles on tree bark, the sort made on purpose, not by chance. Smoke marks, protection marks. The rumors dulled to silence. The preacher's sermons on wickedness faded into rough coughs. The blacksmith's wife started boiling bitter root again, something Rhea had once traded her, the memory of how to prepare it returning at just the right moment. Still, no one spoke Rhea's name, not out of fear of her, but fear of what their own guilt might reveal if they did. Far past the ridge, in a quiet clearing ringed with cottonwoods and stones, Rhea began to shape something not hers by ownership, but by right. She piled logs with her bare hands, shaped crude tools from old iron and bone. She spat into ash to make paste for her wounds, bound them herself. Sable worked beside her, dragging rocks without needing to be told, standing watch as she dug trenches to keep the firewood dry. At night, she sang. Not lyrics, just tones, pieces of lullabies and prayers that had no language anymore. Her voice was cracked from long silence, but the canyon didn't mind. It echoed her back anyway. She wasn't building revenge. She didn't wait for justice or forgiveness. She just built a ring of stones for fire, a table, a rough screen of reeds for drying herbs. One morning she woke to 3 chickens scratching at the edge of the clearing. No note, just a bundle of seeds beside them. She smiled, barely. Someone out there still remembered what she had healed. She said nothing, fed the chickens, turned the soil, not in gratitude, but because the work had always been hers. Her name was no longer passed around in whispers of pity. In this place it was spoken aloud, and it was finally heard. It was the lightest steps that found her. Quick, uneven, barefoot. She heard them before she saw him. Snapped twigs, hurried breaths darting through the cedar. Too clumsy for an animal, too small for a man. She rose from her work, dried root still in hand, and turned. The boy burst into view, panting, wild-eyed. No older than 8. Shirt torn, knees scraped raw. He carried nothing but a cloth bundle and the scent of fear. They said you were a witch, he gasped. But Mama said you healed her feet. When the boils came, he paused, breath ragged. She said if I ever got lost, I should find the woman with fire in her eyes. Rhea didn't answer. She knelt, joints stiff and aching. My sister, he said, voice cracking. They sold her. I bit the man. Then I ran. He held out the bundle with trembling hands. She unfolded it. 2 hard biscuits, a blood-stained cloth strip, a single black crow feather. She looked him in the eyes and gave one nod. You ran far, she said gently, her first words in days. He nodded back. Then he collapsed at her feet. Sable moved ahead, her nose low to the ground, ears pricked. Not aggressive, just curious. The boy flinched at first but then noticed the horse's eyes and slowly reached out his hand, like he understood animals more easily than people. Rhea gently lifted the child and brought him to the fire. She brewed a simple broth from bone and onion, pressed a chilled stone against his bruises, and hung a feather above her doorway, not for decoration, but as acknowledgement. Someone had placed their trust in her again. Someone small and courageous. That night, the boy curled against Sable's side, tucked in like a pup beside a warm shelter. Rhea kept watch, ash streaked across her cheekbones and a blade in her grip. Not out of fear, but as a promise. Tomorrow, she would begin the search for the girl who had been taken. She would leave markers along her path. She would teach the boy the names of stars, the roots that healed, the stones that could cut if necessary. Healing wasn't always gentle. Sometimes it required sharpness, and Rhea hadn't forgotten either how to comfort and how to endure. By the time she reached the edge of Whisper Rock, the boy was asleep on Sable's back, and her pack hung low. The wind had turned dry and warm, carrying with it the scent of distant pine smoke. It reminded her of when women burned cedar to clear lies from a home. But this fire was different. This one moved on two legs. She had followed the wagon ruts south for 2 days, reading the trampled reeds, crushed berries, and abandoned boot prints. Every sign whispered a story. Each bent branch told her a child had passed through burdened and afraid. She didn't need a map. Her memory and the way the land leaned toward sorrow were guide enough. At a trading post near Lakota land, she asked no questions, just watched. And then she saw her. A girl of maybe 10, too still for someone so young, sitting behind a crate of boiled corn with a frozen look in her eyes. Rhea walked up, looked her straight in the face and said, "Your brother bid a man for you." The girl blinked once, twice. Then her chin dropped to her chest as if the tension had been the only thing keeping her upright. A man in a leather coat stepped toward them. "That one yours?" he asked, mouth curling in a sneer. Rhea turned calmly. "She is now." He chuckled and reached for her arm. Sable stepped forward. No sound, no command, just presence. The man hesitated, hands lifting in caution, uncertain now which was more dangerous, the woman or the horse. Rhea took the girl's hand, turned her back on the post, and walked. No one tried to stop her. That night, the three of them lay beside a low fire set in a shallow pit of rock. The girl finally spoke. "Mama died from the fever," she said. "They said we were payment." Rhea gave a single nod, then showed her how to stir the ashes with a cedar branch to read the wind's story. The boy murmured in his sleep, shifting nearby. For the first time in many years, Rhea smiled. Not because she felt safe, but because someone else might. She was no longer only the woman who had survived the hanging. She had become something else, a fire moving forward. And no one dared try to put it out. At dawn, they returned to Hollow Creek. Not in hiding, not in shame, but walking slow, so every sound echoed louder. The thud of hooves, the creak of leather, the soft breathing of two children who no longer jumped at every noise. Rhea led them, her braids looped tight, a bundle of sage on her back, and the old hanging rope coiled at her waist. Not for violence, but as memory. No one met them in the square. Not at first. But the sound of Sable's steps on the wooden walk echoed like a verdict. Faces began to appear, behind curtains in alleyways around corners. Some gasped. Some looked away. But no one spoke. Rhea walked to the post where she had once hung. She tied the rope back where it had been, high, tight, the knot still stained dark. Then she added something new beneath it. A braid of sweetgrass and cedar, a ribbon torn from the girl's dress, and one black crow feather from the boy's bundle. Not revenge, not pardon, just truth. A truth they would all have to see every day. Marshall Glay stepped out onto the boardwalk, looking smaller and older than she remembered. "You don't have claim here," he said, voice thin. Rhea looked him in the eye. "Good," she said. "I'm not staying." Then she faced the gathering crowd. "I came so you'd see. What you built can't hold." She looked down at the children beside her. They stood still and steady. "You taught them to be silent. I taught them to plant." And with that, she walked away, straight through the heart of the town, through every shadow that had once tried to break her. They passed the saloon, where Jory Bell stood in the doorway and gave a slow nod, hand over his heart. They passed the church, where the preacher's wife held her breath. When they reached the edge of the trees, the girl turned to look back. Are we free now? She asked. Rhea kept her eyes ahead, on the clearing they would call home. We're fed, she said. That's where it begins. Behind them, the rope swung lightly in the morning breeze. No one dared touch it. Not again.